Okay, we're going to move on to Naveen Jain and his family. I wondered how I would introduce Naveen in a way that you all might understand, and I thought I could describe him as a cross between Duddy Kravitz and Peter Pan. Because he's had such a good time and made so much money so apparently quickly and effortlessly out of a number of new economy startups that he doesn't understand why we don't all do the same, the way he has done time and time and time again, not to mention his unspeakably smart and very attractive son and daughter. This is Naveen Jain. Nice to see you.
I'm here to tell you that there is not a problem on earth that innovation and entrepreneurship can't solve. Now, let me just define what I really mean by entrepreneurship. Most people think of an entrepreneur as somebody who starts a company. To me, an entrepreneur is somebody, it's just a state of mind. When you think not just about the problem and not just think about the solution, you go out and do something about it. The day you start to do something about it, you become an entrepreneur. So all you have to do is think about what is the biggest problem that you want solved and go out and do something about it. It's that simple. So if you want to create $1 billion company, and how many in this room do want to create $1 billion company? Raise your hand. I'll tell you one simple solution. It is really trivial. Go out and solve a $10 billion problem. That's all you have to do. Now you ask me, where am I going to find these $10 billion problems? And I'll tell you, $1 trillion problems, not just $10 billion problems. You heard from Don, the education system is broken. Well, guess what? As an entrepreneur, you just define the problem in a wrong way. The minute you think your education system is broken, what do you do about it? You want to go fix it. Guess what? Our education system is not broken. It is simply obsolete. And when something is obsolete, you don't go out and fix it. You replace it, right? It's taking your old Nokia phone that your grandfather is using and says, Grandpa, your phone is broken. Grandpa says it does exactly what it was designed to do. It makes phone calls. It doesn't slide. It doesn't do application. It doesn't do tweet. It's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Our needs have changed. When our needs have changed, you go out and implement a different system. So when Don goes out and says the new generation is smarter, he's wrong. They are not smarter, they are just different. When somebody is different, you may think of them as smarter, but they are just different. They think differently than we do. The needs are different. The society had changed. In the days when we grew up, it was really simple. Our education system was designed so we could learn a certain skill and use them for the rest of our life. In the new generation, when the technology is moving exponentially, everything that we learn becomes obsolete in 5 to 10 years. That means anything that we learn becomes obsolete by the time we graduate. Imagine in that society, what are we teaching? When you have an iPhone in your palm of your hand, you have access to more information than Bill Clinton did as a president. That device has more power than the lander that landed the people on the moon. We all have access to everything we need. Now we need to teach children how to learn. And that's $1 trillion problem. You say, well, that's only $1 trillion problem. There are 500 of us. What are we all going to do? Let me continue to define the next set of problems. Healthcare. People say, well, the healthcare is a big problem. What are we going to do about it? Well, again, the people are thinking about the problem very differently. They think the healthcare costs are going up, so we need to come up with different ways of seeing the doctor. We need to build more hospitals because there are billions of people around the world who have no access to healthcare. Imagine if your cell phone became a device that can diagnose the diseases better than a primary care physician. And imagine if you can have simply a sensor, you can spit on it, and it can tell you better than any doctor whether you have a dengue fever, malaria, HIV, or TB, or simply a flu. All of these are not science fiction. These are science reality being done today by 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds. So what I'm going to do is give you one or two more examples of how you can use innovation to solve some of the largest problems. And then I'm going to invite some of the younger generation to talk about those problems and what are they doing about it. You talk about energy. If you think about energy, we all are bathed in energy. Today, there are more sun is falling on Earth than we can ever use. In fact, 10 times more energy is being wasted every day. Imagine if you're able to take that. Imagine if you take the ocean, that 70% of our planet is salt water. What if you can create a synthetic bacteria that can convert the salt water into fossil fuel? What if you're able to create enough energy so you can desalinize the ocean and nothing but a fresh water? And if you all care about the environment, all you have to do is just become a one day in a month a vegetarian and you'll save the planet. Right. The cattle are the biggest cause of the damage to the planet. So I'm not here to preach you anything. I'm just simply telling you it's just simply about the mindset about how you look at the problem. Now, with that, I'd like to bring in here two of our kids here, and the third couldn't be here, but I'm going to describe to you. Can I invite Ankur and Priyanka to come on the stage, please? Ankur, please. So, just introduce them to you. Ankur is our oldest son. He is now 23 years old. Imagine he's grown up. And in 23 years of age, he has done some amazing things. When he was 16 years old, he started something called Kairos Society, a nonprofit that brings together 350 brightest students from around the world, hosts them at the floor of New York Stock Exchange, and brings the 150 top mentors to help them become successful. He is now a founder and CEO of a company called Human, and he'll tell you a little bit more about what he's doing. Our daughter, who is 19-year-old, she's going to be a sophomore at Stanford. And when she was 17-year-old, she started something called I Care, We Care to bring the youth generation together to solve some of the biggest problems. She's also the youth champion leader at the United Nations Foundation. She's also at a freshman represented Stanford as a woman in business, and now she's on the board of women in business at Stanford. Our youngest, who couldn't be here because he actually selected as one of the 5 students to attend a Singularity University to learn about exponential technology. He has teamed up with other teen wonders, Jack Andraka and Catherine Wong, to be able to diagnose the diseases and competing for a $10 million X Prize foundation. So imagine these are the 3 kids who are going out and making a difference. So I'm going to start with you, Ankur. Can you tell us what is it that the next generation is thinking about and doing to solve some of these grandest challenges that are facing the humanity?
Yeah. So how many of you guys are familiar with companies going out and talking about how to bring innovation back to big companies? These conversations we're hearing over and over again. What we've realized is big companies shouldn't and can't compete on being disruptive. If you look at all the technologies that have come out in the last 10 years, they've been by a small population of people connected to the internet, about 2 to 3 billion people. Over the next 5 years, you have 3 billion more people coming online with access to all of this information. So what do we do about it? About 5 years ago, we started a group called the Kairos Society. And we said, if you could focus the next generation of entrepreneurs, the next generation of innovators on solving the world's biggest problems, what would the world look like? And what we found is that it's actually this really interesting marriage where people that are the next generation don't think of themselves as innovators. They just look at problems fundamentally in a new way. So this year we said to ourselves, we partnered up with Johnson & Johnson, and we said, what is the next $1 billion, $10 billion market opportunity? And they said, God, if we could just figure out how to use the cell phone to diagnose people and have basically get immediate access to healthcare, it's 9 p.m., you're in Toronto, how would you solve that problem? They've invested tens of millions of dollars in telemedicine, artificial intelligence. What do you think the next generation of students came up with? Uber for doctors. Right? It's so simple, they said. We've got EMTs, you've got nurses, you have residency students. Most of the problems aren't life-threatening. For those, you can use the hospitals. Why don't we just aggregate the demand and tie it to the consumers worldwide? So they started that, and now we've got a company in London, one of 100 companies we've launched in the last 5 years, that's going out and solving this problem, but with the marriage of partners like Johnson & Johnson, they're able to bring the healthcare professionals, bring the insurance companies on, and that's how you create disruptive innovation. It's providing extremely focused challenges to non-experts. Because when you have no idea what you're supposed to do, you also have no idea what you can't do. And that's one of the biggest misnomers. It doesn't matter how much you train experts in these big companies, they're trained to know what they should and shouldn't do. And so there's a really exciting opportunity over the next 5 years.
So Ankur, is that basically what you're saying is once you become expert in your field, you are more or less useless in your field. So if you really want, if you want disruption, most of the disruption actually come from non-experts. And there is actually a reason why our brain, the neocortex, works as a pattern matching device. And once you become an expert, the problem and the solution come together. When you're non-expert, you're thinking much more in abstract terms, and you come up with a very disruptive solution. So it's not about just thinking outside the box. It's really thinking in a different box. So Priyanka, so you have been looking at a lot of the things about using the young generation to solve some of the largest problems, especially around the girls' education and other things. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what excites you?
So if we talk about $10 billion problems, I'd say that there's two. First, I'd say that girls' education is one of the most important issues facing the world today. And it sounds cliche, and people talk about it, but we don't deal with it enough. Right now, there are 70 million girls who are uneducated in the developing world. And that's really interesting to me because when a girl is educated, she'll marry 4 years later, she'll marry with choice, she'll have 2 fewer kids, she's 3 times less likely to have HIV/AIDS. She's more likely to send her own kids to school. There's a direct correlation between the number of years a girl is in school and the future health of her children. Every year she's in school, she makes 20% more later in her life. And she will reinvest 90% of the money that she makes back into her family and her community. So it seems simple, it seems smart, so why aren't we doing it? Why are only 2 cents of every dollar that's donated to international development, only 2 cents goes to girls? And that's just mind-boggling to me. So I am really, really passionate about solving girls' education. And to do that, as my dad said, I work with the United Nations Foundation as a youth champion for Girl Up. It's a campaign of the United Nations Foundation that works with adolescent girls here in the US and across borders to ensure that girls are healthy, safe, educated, counted, and positioned to be the next generation of leaders. And so for me, my passion was always girls' education. But when I look around, I see people who are passionate about so many different things, whether it's the environment or children's rights. But so many young people don't see that they can do something about these problems. And so when I was a sophomore in high school, I'd talk to my friends and they'd say, I care about children's rights, but what am I supposed to do about it? And that really bothered me, that they had these ideas, they had these visions, but they had nowhere to go with them. And at my high school, we had a requirement that we had to participate in community service 25 hours a year, and everyone hated it. They went along and they got their form signed, and it was a miserable job, commitment experience that no one enjoyed and no one did after they graduated. And that bothered me. I sat there and thought, if all of these kids are volunteering and they have ideas, why aren't we connecting them? And so what we started with a group of my friends, we decided, okay, how do we make this fun? How do we make this an opportunity for students to learn? And so what we did is we started a social network that connects students to the issues that they're most passionate about, the organizations that are dealing with those issues, and their friends who also care about the same issues who they can volunteer with together. And as Ankur said, it's important to have fresh ideas in business. And I think it's equally important to have fresh ideas for nonprofits, where the focus is always on barriers and why things can't be done, and on financial barriers and problems and, oh, that government's tried that before, or we don't work with that government because our countries don't get along. Students don't care. We don't care if we're not supposed to be friends. We don't care if we live in different countries, because to us, she's another 19-year-old girl who isn't getting an education, and that pisses me off. And I don't care how many times my parents tell me no, I'm going to do something anyway. And so I think if we can bring that new perspective back to nonprofits, we would see a huge change.
So I agree with you, Priyanka. Philanthropy should never be about giving money. Philanthropy is about solving problems. And I think it's simply the mindset of an entrepreneur that changes the way you think. And I'm going to give you an anecdotal evidence of how we, as an entrepreneur, you look at a basic problem. A couple of months ago, I met a woman who was providing a homeless shelter for women, a basic philanthropic problem. And she said, we have been so successful, we need to expand now, and we're looking to fundraise, which is what philanthropic organizations organizations do. And I say, have you thought about from an entrepreneur's perspective, what is your product and who's your customer? That's not the question anybody ever asks her. She thought about for a second and say, my product are my women, my product is my shelter, and my customers are my women. And I say, young lady, you have a real problem. She said, what? Your customers don't pay. And I said, well, she said, what would you do? I say, as an entrepreneur, you just have to define the problem differently. What if I told you that women are your product and your local businesses are your customers? So that means you can now provide a part-time help to these local businesses. And the more women you have, now more products you have to sell. And these people have to hire the part-time workers anyway. Now you can use these women who need help in the night to be able to work during the day, and you can train them. So not only they're being trained, now you have a self-supporting organization. Imagine that simple change in her mindset got her to be a self-sustainable organization, and she never had to ask for money again. So that's the kind of mindset we need in philanthropy, is think like an entrepreneur. And if you're really interested in thinking like an entrepreneur or about any of these topics like education or healthcare, just go to Forbes.com. I write quite a bit, so just type my name on Forbes.com and you can hear a lot more about it. But let's talk to you guys here.
Well, I just want to throw, big data, we keep talking about this and how it's affecting the world.
Yes.
I think for anybody looking to start another major opportunity, we've noticed a pretty interesting trend that I think is worth sharing with this crowd. So over the last 10 years, data started to grow exponentially. And the amount of information we have available to us it's outstanding. The problem is it's nearly impossible now for us to make sense of any of this. Has anyone thought about the ridiculous of the fact that we've trained our brain to think in keywords? So when we're trying to find information, we think keyword, Google search, search. It's crazy. And so I think when you look at the trends that Rick was talking about, I think the real challenge that somebody in this room has to solve is how do we actually organize all this information that's being created and present it in the way we think? Because then when you're dealing with entrepreneurs or when you're dealing with philanthropists, you can start making decisions faster and smarter, right?
So, Ankur, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the company you're doing that actually does something similar?
So I'll give you just a little preview, but we're not supposed to announce this for another month, so I don't know.
But this is Idea City. You can talk about ideas.
So recently, over the last year, we've been working quietly, and you'll get a 45-second preview of this, to actually help organize all the information on the most important thing in our life, which is our relationships and our contacts. Because the number of people we're meeting today, who they are, how we can make sense of these relationships, become completely overwhelming. So we started a company called Human, where for the first time, we can leverage the power of this data to help us navigate our relationships in a smarter way. So when you meet people at Idea City, when you have Human, you'll just be able to go home and type, who was it that I met last night who was friends with Naveen? And without any data entry, we can find that contact. When you say, I landed in Toronto, who do I need to reach out to? You can just type in, who is it that we know that lives in Toronto, and find the relationships that matter most so we can create a meaningful relationship out of that. And if you're trying to connect with somebody, we can quickly find out who is the most trusted introduction from somebody I know. So you're not guessing with 50 mutual friends or hundreds of mutual friends or searching LinkedIn and Facebook and Googling people to see how they know each other, because all that information is at your fingertips in the way you think. So we'll be launching this.
That's brilliant, and I'm so glad you are able to at least give a preview to the Idea City here. Priyanka, is there some things you want to tell the audience about if they want to get involved and really making a difference? How do their children, not these adults, how do their children get involved and really go out and make something important?
Well, I think that you guys have an equally important role as people my age, and I think that's listening to us. I think it's having conversations with us, it's fostering our ideas, and it's not treating us like we're kids, because I'm told time and time again that you guys are the leaders of tomorrow, and we're so excited for you. And what I always want to say is why? Why can't we be the leaders of today? And I think that you guys, there's maybe some room in there for us, and that we can have conversations, intelligent conversations. And if we can foster the ideas of young people, I think we'd all be surprised at the ideas and problems that we could solve.
I would like to invite the grandpa Moses here, and if he can, what does he think of this idea?
Don't you feel you attended a revival meeting in the church of digital utopianism? The thing about this way of thinking is it's so audacious. You'll get a little more of this when we meet the gang from Singularity University later this afternoon. And it's not only audacious, but it seems effortless. I mean, I have to work, you know. I get up, I shuffle papers, I make phone calls, I beg for money. The answer is no most of the time. These people have never heard no in their lives.
Thank you.
That's
We do, I'm
fantastic,
just really bad at
Priyanka.
listening to it.
Moses, we never take no for an answer. Thank you, Moses.
Attaboy.
You take it.
The first family of the Church of Digital Utopianism.